Hi, and welcome back to another episode of our weekly, catch-up series with Philip O'Connor, who has, amidst his very busy schedule, keeping with us, the Indian broadcasters as well. He has been very kind to, give us his time as well to give us the perspective. And I think we're closing in on a little over a month, right, with you in Vancouver, Canada. Before we go into the nitty-gritty of the tournament, are you feeling a little bit of the cabin fever, which generally hits you when you're in a certain place for a long period of time?
Yeah, it becomes sort of like a hamster wheel, Ashish, because it's just press conference, match, spot news story, injury, FIFA controversy, Donald Trump says something stupid,
Oh
this
my
kind of
God,
thing.
yeah.
And
Uh,
it just keeps going. Usually after the group stage, because most of the games at any tournament happen during the group stage, and then it gets a little bit quieter during the knockout rounds. But that just hasn't been the case because this is one of those World Cups that there's so many different news lines. You had the July 4th, you had July 1st was Canada's big national day and that kind of thing. So stuff just keeps on happening, and then somebody was saying to me this morning about the games and that kind of thing, and we were all sort of, thinking that 48 teams for the World Cup, or maybe the games aren't going to be great. And truly, there have been some terrible games and some really boring games. But the games that have been good, even as we reach, we haven't even reached the quarterfinals yet because there's so many teams in it. And there's been some amazing games over the weekend.
yeah, definitely. I mean, also after a point, the games also you kind of forget what incident happened from which game as well. There is that confusion which arises. Like even I am did this happen in this game or was it happening in the previous game? So yeah, it hits you also after a point. And generally speaking, a lot of the games which happen in the morning, like at least in Indian time, they somehow happen to be bangers. And for whatever reason, I'm unable to watch them live. Like it is truly insane. But yeah, I think we have to start with how Norway have done. I think they have. I think they've shocked me pleasantly. I didn't expect them to do as well as they have done. I honestly didn't expect them to reach the round of 16, let alone the quarters. And I think they've shown a little bit of measure of maturity as well with the way they've approached the tournament throughout the thing. And I don't know. I think it's time for you to let me know about the insights about them.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm not that surprised, Ashish, and especially I'm not surprised they beat Brazil because Brazil were very much sort of trading on what they've done, the World Cup since the 1950s kind of thing. That's not who Brazil are anymore, right? The guy that started up front for Brazil yesterday that has had Ronaldo. It has had, so many great centre forwards, Pele, these guys. The guy who started for them yesterday was playing for Wolves a little over a year ago. That's not Brazil are no longer this great South American or world superpower. And I thought what Norway did was incredible because what Norway does is relatively simple. They basically the thing is all set up to get the best out of Erling Haaland, and Erling Haaland just keeps doing it. Now there are ways of stopping that, and yesterday's match was interesting from a tactical point of view because it was the second time that Alexander Sørloth on one wing and Antonio Nusa on the other. They both played the first half and they were both terrible, right? Now, that might seem like a very harsh thing to say, but they just didn't do anything. Like Nusa kept giving the ball away. And one thing you don't want to give to Brazil, despite the fact that they're not as good as they were in 1970 or 1982 or 2002 or whatever, they're still very good footballers. And Nusa kept giving the ball away and creating these counter-attacking chances. It took energy for Norway in that heat to defend those things. But once they switched out Nusa and Sørloth at the break, I thought it was a huge. Like once they did that, I thought there's no way Norway are losing this game because they brought in Oscar Bob on one wing and Sheldon up on the other wing. Sheldon up has been brilliant. He's created a couple of opportunities, and in North America, they call them hockey assists. So it's not the pass for the goal, it's the
Hmm.
pass to the pass for the goal. And Sheldon is brilliant at that kind of thing. He's brilliant at opening things up. Odegaard is very good at that as well. But the two goals yesterday, the cross was absolutely brilliant from Sheldon for Holland to open the scoring. And then just the power. I was saying just before, we have a chat room for every game. I was saying just before, I said, Holland is dead, right? He has no energy left whatsoever. And he gets the ball on the edge of the box. And he goes, well, I'm not running anymore. I'm not going to do anything here. And then he just absolutely smashes it into the corner between the legs and that kind of thing. And it was incredibly affirming to see that kind of team that is, they know who they are and they know how good they can be. And they know that if they reach that level, they can make it difficult for anybody. And the best thing about that then, because the decision that like when they would find out who they're going to play later in the evening when England played Mexico, and it turned out, of course, that England have won that game. Sorry for spoiling that for anybody who hasn't seen it yet,
Yeah.
But now they have, like 5 days to recover. They were given a night off last night in New York, and they've got 5 days to recover now, and they will do the same thing against England. But it's a great way to be able to play football to say this is what we have. Come and beat us, because England haven't shown Jude Bellingham apart. They haven't shown the ability to really solve the puzzles that are in front of them. Last night's game against Mexico, I have no idea what was happening in that game. There were so many penalties and everything else like that. But England, I don't know who England are in this tournament just yet, because they keep changing and they keep trying to do things in different ways and saying, okay, no Jude Bellingham, you do it. No Saka, you do it. No Harry Kane, you do it. Whereas with Norway, they know exactly what they want to do, and it makes it so much easier for them to perform.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of that as well, like knowing exactly what you are as a team, right? And I think that's instilled by Solbakken as well, right? The way he is very clear with what he wants from his team, I think. He also, like, especially like the decision to rest his first 11 for the third group game. I mean, it removed a lot from the spectacle of, the against France, who played their first team. But it was a very pragmatic decision because at the end of the day, even you did mention just now, like Holland was feeling a little bit of that tiredness, and that's why he took that shot. And like whatever, it's a marginal gain, but it definitely helps because you're playing an extra game as well in such a World Cup as well. And getting that rest is also very important. I think he also understands that because there is also a little bit of that story of like, I mean, I found out about this in the preview to the tournament as well, like how he was clinically, he had a heart attack on the pitch as well, and that I think that also informs the way he thinks. I don't know, maybe I'm inferring a lot from that, but what do you feel? Is that a part of how he thinks about stuff?
Definitely. So Stoll is a very interesting guy. He's a very gruff, straightforward. There are a million men like him in Scandinavian football, and if it wasn't for men like him, there would be no Scandinavian football. But that perspective that he had. So back at the beginning of the 2000s, he collapsed on a training pitch in Denmark, I think it was. He had a heart attack and was dead, clinically dead for 7 minutes, and was brought back. His playing career ended that day, and he was sort of brought back to life and that kind of thing. But this is quite similar to Christian Eriksen. And
Hmm.
then he and his coaching career. And of course, he made his name really with FC Copenhagen in the Danish Superliga there, and went on to Wolves, and he's had other jobs, that kind of thing. But he's such a Norwegian Scandinavian football manager. This is who they are, right? It's amazing that he doesn't play, more of that sort of straightforward 4-4-2. And he even mentions the guys like, those two coaches, Bob Houghton and Roy Hodgson, who's probably still coaching somewhere. They were the guys who brought this style of football to Scandinavia. And that's in the DNA of Scandinavian football. Now, I don't mean the Danes. The Danes are much more sort of, leaning towards the Dutch total football
Yeah.
model from the 70s. But certainly in Sweden and Norway, that's how the game is and was played. And Solbakken has sort of tweaked that a little bit because, of course, he has a big centre forward, a big number 9 centre forward in Erling Haaland, but he plays a sort of a more complicated game. So, but the wingers that he plays a left-footed winger on the right wing and a right-footed winger on the left wing. He wants it to cut in and be able to shoot, but he also wants it to be able to cross. So the cross from Sheldrup yesterday was an in-swinger with his right foot that Haaland managed to head in. That's the only difference. Is he's not asking the guys to go to the byline and cross the ball, but he's still asking him to get the ball into the box. And he really does like. He gave the players a day off last night. He gave them, like, in the beginning of the tournament, I think it was after the first game of the tournament, they had like a 6 day break. And he just said, get out of here. I don't want to see you. Go hang out with your families. Don't even stay in this hotel if you don't want to. And that's very unusual because most football associations are extremely controlling and they get a bunch of young men together and they won't let them go or do anything by themselves. But Solbakken talks about freedom under responsibility and he lets them go. But the other point as well, Ashish, and I don't think it should be underestimated, is in that game against France, so many players like Strand Larsen got to play. All these guys got to play a game. Østegård got to start a game. And what that means then is that once you've been in the fire here, it's not going to be new to you. So he can turn to
Hmm.
any of those guys now in the game against England, depending on what he needs because of fatigue or because of injury or because of any of those things. And all of these guys have already been in there. And very few teams can say that you're picking somebody off the bench because it tends to be the longer the tournament goes on, the less likely you are to pick somebody to play. I think Jens Petter Hauge from Bodø Glimt is one of you who hasn't seen that much action. And he would be a great option for them if they need to throw on another creative player to do things against England. So there's an awful lot to be said for his style of management, not just his tactics and that kind of thing, but also his man management.
Yeah, I think like there is a sense of that emotional intelligence as well, right? From the way you described a lot of stuff as well. And that's very important as well, especially in international management, right? Because it's not fully tactics, as we all know in international management. It's a lot of other stuff, how you're able to create that atmosphere as well. And that makes and breaks teams. And you could see that in the way, even the post match celebration, which they do, the whole drum, the rowing celebration, that all adds to the feel good factor. And you include the fans as well. Like, one thing which maybe it is something which I just noticed, but I do feel they're leaving a lot of meat on the bone at set pieces. I do feel like they could be doing a little better at set pieces, especially since they are one of the bigger teams of the tournament. I don't know whether you feel the same, but yeah, I think that's something they could be doing better.
What's odd about that, Ashish, is, and I think this is to do with the heat and the humidity and fatigue, right? Because every ball from set pieces is dropping short, right? They're lacking
Mm.
that precision from Martin Odegaard, especially when when he's taking corners from the right side of his left foot and that kind of thing. I've been not disappointed, but I've noted how okay he's usually much better than this. And the fact of the matter is that running 10 kilometers in a game in the Premier League on a Tuesday night at Stoke is one thing. Doing that in the middle of the day in Miami or in the heat of New York summer, that kind of thing, is something entirely different altogether. And I think that in those moments, that's what's lacking. That little snap, that little bit of energy that you need to hit those balls in is lacking. And you can't really ask anybody else to do it because when Odegaard hits them perfectly, he hits them better than anybody in the world. So you're kind of weighing that up. And I do think that that's going to be a bit of a bigger thing now going forward because against the longer you go on in this tournament, the less chances you get, the less space there is, the less time there is to do anything. And you really have to maximize that. But I would sort of think as well, knowing Solbakken for 20 odd years, I would say that he had a game plan for the group stage. He had a game plan for the first couple of knockout games. And now that's getting really serious. I would imagine that there's a whole playbook of stuff that they're going to pull in for set pieces now. Because frankly, they didn't really need set pieces until now. So they've been able to score goals from open play. Haaland has been able to score goals from open play. England, I think, Harry Kane has 7 goals and most of them are penalties kind of thing. So that's not what Norway are doing at the moment. And I
Yeah.
think that's going to stand them. So I'd say they've been keeping their powder dry a little bit. And again, if you look at the game management of it, they had one game where they got the winner fairly late, I think, against the Ivory Coast. Haaland got the winner. But for the most part, France aside, they've been able to try things out. They've been able to. They haven't had to reveal their whole hand.
Mm.
Sometimes in baseball, you'll have a good pitcher and he'll have a lead of 5 or 6 runs and that kind of thing. And he can go on until the 6th, the 7th, the 8th innings or whatever. But you take him out just to give him the rest because what's the point in tiring a guy out? And that's what Norway have been able to do. So I would say that you'll probably see a little bit better, a little bit more creativity coming from their set pieces as the tournament progresses.
Definitely. Now on to their game against England, where I mean they do get a lot of their at least the historical uh, factor of how Norwegian football developed was from England. So there is a little bit of that, little brother, bigger brother dynamic there as well, I would guess. But okay, so I have been actually pleasantly surprised by how resilient England have been, like especially in the DR Congo and the Mexico game. Like uh, past iterations of England squads, I've seen them squander those games and be lose their heads a bit, I would say. And also, I feel that Bellingham is having a Zidane 1998 tournament. I don't know whether you feel that way, but I do feel like I have honestly felt that he's England's best player, and he has shown that this tournament. What are your thoughts on how they will do against England?
Yeah, it's incredible the amount of abuse that Bellingham gets, and you should drop him, and he can only play, you have to sacrifice so much for him. But he has been their best player, and the 2 goals last night within, I think it was 1 minute 38 seconds, it took him to score 2 goals against Mexico, without which they wouldn't have won the game. It was incredible solo performance. And I was saying it before the game. I was joking with a colleague who was working on the match. I was saying you can start writing about Bellingham now because Bellingham's going to do something this evening. And I was texting the same college during the game, going, see, mystic field. I had my crystal ball out and I was looking at these things. And it's incredible to hear that sort of criticism of it. And again, an awful lot of people get caught up in football now, because they're watching football, and they're consuming so much content online and that kind of thing. But an awful lot of them don't actually understand what it is they're looking at, right? So
Hmm.
last night, I would say with Mexico, Mexico made England look better than they were, right? You spoke about the resilience of England and that kind of thing, right? But Mexico played into their hands by when England went to a back 5 late on in the game, when they were down a man. Kwanzaa's tackle, I have no idea what he was doing. And people said,
Oh, well.
oh, he slipped and he went over the ball. It's like, you don't put yourself in that situation where you can't slip and go over the ball. The minute you leave your feet, and it was the same thing for Christopher Aya, who gave away the first penalty that was missed by Bruno Guimaraes for Brazil against Norway. Don't leave your feet. because the moment you leave your feet, you're in trouble. And I actually got his toe to the ball. He got the tiniest touch on that. And people were going, oh, that makes it not a penalty. No, it's still a penalty because you're going in there recklessly with your studs up and that kind of thing. You get a red card. But Mexico's way of trying to attack England and saying, okay, we're going to play crosses into the box. We're going to look for crosses into the box. Dan Burn comes in as if he's trying out for an NBA team in the basketball league over here, right? Heads everything away. And you go, well, of course he does. That's what they brought him on for. So, and again,
That's
I
his
think we
meat and
spoke about this.
potatoes, so to speak.
Yeah,
That's his game.
that's Premier League football. And if you look forward then to England against Norway, and the idea that, like the thing about Norway's goal, their first goal was that it was the right time and situation for the cross, right? You cannot simply bombard the box. That's not, modern football doesn't work that way, where you can bombard the box and then expect the ball to just fall, for your centre forward to poke into the back of the net. That was fine in the 70s and the 80s, the early 90s. Football doesn't work like that anymore. The way people defend, the angles they run at you in defence, all these kinds of things have to be taken into consideration. And Mexico were completely out of it. What Mexico should have done last night was run at the centre of that England defence, and they had the opportunities to do so. Because once you do that, people start to move towards the ball. Instinctively, you have no choice but to move towards the ball. And that's where everything else opens up. But that's what Mexico didn't do. And again, I think with an Odegaard in the team, alongside the guy Sam Develli as well for Norway, who's very tall, but also very good at the ball at his feet, they will attack the centre of that England defence to open up spaces a little bit in the left and right channels and that kind of thing. And that's going to be a fascinating game when the two of them get it together.
Do you have any predictions for this game? What do you feel? What is your thing?
I honestly think that Norway now, I mean, we've seen them doing an awful lot of rowing, but I think they have the wind in their sails at the moment as well, and I think it's very difficult when you get a team on a roll like that and they understand what they're being asked to do, right? I think part of what Sweden's problem was that some of the players didn't really understand what their role was supposed to be, and especially in transition from defence to attack, you have to be able to make those transitions very, very quickly. Norway do that really, really well. Nobody looks like they're thinking. Nobody standing there scratching their beard, going, "Okay, I need to do this," or "Where should I be right now?" They all know instinctively what they have to do. And I think that, Norway are playing with house money now. When you get to the quarterfinals as a small nation of 5 million people, and, you're playing against England, one of the great nations in the game, World Cup winners in 1966, the pressure is all on England now. So I think that Norway will be able to play with the freedom. They'll be able to play rested. They will do nothing in training all week. They will wander around that pitch in Miami at, 9 o'clock in the morning, do a few bits and pieces, and that's it, So they will be fresh coming into that game. I expect an absolute banger of a game, but I do think it's going to be one of those old-fashioned English blood and thunder kind of games, But I think it'll be brilliant. And I do think that a whole lot, everybody's talking about, these are Premier League defenders and these are guys who play at the top level, they play every week. Yeah, but he scores against them every week, lads, right? This is the thing. And unless you can find a way of stopping him next Saturday night, it's not going to happen.
God, I hope you're right, because I would have actually, if Mexico had won, I would have been doing the show today in my version of sombrero with the mariachi, and that's I was about to do that. If Mexico had kept their will about them, and yeah, like I mean, I'm one of the biggest haters of England out there. Like, very sorry to say, even though I'm a big time Chelsea fan, I do hold a little bit of a soft corner to Thomas Tuchel, but even then, I cannot. Like this, about to supporting England in any capacity.
There are limits. There are limits when it comes to England. All right.
Yes, exactly. Okay, but like with regard to the Gerald Kwanzaa, suspension, maybe the incoming Prime Minister Andy Burnham can give a call to Gianni Infantino, and maybe it could get overturned, or suspended, if you know what I mean.
That seems to be the way it works, actually. So you get a red card,
Yeah.
and then you just ring your head of state, and they call up and that kind of thing. And that's one of those stories. The reason I'm partially so busy today is because Stola Solback and the Norway coach has spoken out about it. Lisa Klovnes, she sent an SMS this morning, with a statement about it, and that. And it's a huge thing because we're speaking, of course, ahead of the USA Belgium game, which is taking place later on today. Here in North America. And, like the idea that, FIFA talks about political interference and, we talk about two completely separate things here for a second, right? We have a situation, I obviously come from Ireland, as your listeners and viewers might know. Ireland are due to play against Israel in the Nations League. And there has been a huge discussion about whether or not those games should play, whether Ireland should refuse to play against Israel because of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And I've interviewed Imad Zatara, former Palestinian captain of the football team there, and he has begged not just the Irish players, but supporters and broadcasters to back that call as well, right? Now, the problem for the Irish Football Association or the Football Association of Ireland is that, again, a nation of 5 million people, small, very little voice, very little political power, and they are being told that the government should not get involved in this. There should be no political interference. And yet we fast forward a week or two, and the White House called 3 times to get a red card overturned just because this lad happens to be fairly handy in front of goal. And it really is a shame because now as we're getting into the really sort of exciting and interesting part of it, we're talking about something that essentially has nothing to do with football, but we're also staging a World Cup on a continent that is still struggling with its relationship to the game. So I don't want this to become the sort of thing that you just expect to happen in football now, because let's face it, we've already got 4 quarters, right? These hydration breaks now have run in 4 quarters just for an American TV audience.
Yeah.
Will we see that in the Champions League in Europe this year? Probably. It's like the amount of money that they're selling these advertising spots for is incredible. But the idea is somehow that a head of state can call up, because if this happened in AFCON, right, in the African Cup of Nations,
Yeah.
what do you think would have been said about it? If this happened in an Asian football tournament or in the
Yeah.
Asian Champions League, what do you think would be said about it? They'd be talking about, tin pot dictators, and we'd be talking about,
Yeah.
undemocratic nations, that kind of thing.
Typical African football, typical Asian football, like that.
Exactly, and that to me is that double standard is something that we just can't have. The thing
Yeah.
about football is that the rules allegedly are the same all over the world, but clearly that's not the case at the moment.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a I have having a thought for Lauren Balogun, who is at the center of all this. He seems like a nice young man as well. Like, I mean, he seems to be about all the right things, and to be put in the midst of it for something out of his control also is little, icky, so to speak. That's what I would say. And I don't think
Yeah,
he'll also be, feeling good about it. Let's put it that way.
no, it's going to attach itself to him as well. I mean, I think he knew when he got the red card. Okay, I get a red card. That's it. I'm banned for the next game,
Yeah,
and people sort of accept that. And it goes with the territory. But again, there is precedent here because there was a ban handed out because Cristiano Ronaldo was sent off in the qualifiers against Ireland, and he was banned for 3 games. And that ban was rescinded. The last two games of that were suspended just so that Ronaldo could play in the World Cup. So it's not like this is without precedent, but it's also not something that we can we can just allow to slip into the game, because then it just becomes a case of who's the biggest dog in the playground kind of thing, and they get to decide who plays. So, and I can see this, like, this is going to be one of those where it goes to the court of arbitration sport. If Belgium lose this evening, it'll go to the court of arbitration sport, and there'll be all sorts of stuff and football games should not be decided in courtrooms. They should be decided on grass pitches around the world.
yeah.
And that's really the sad part of it. Like, when we start talking about something other than the sport itself, when governance goes center stage, then it's never good.
Exactly. Like, I think that is also like it opens also a can of worms, because even today, just a few hours back, I did see that France are appealing the Michael Olise yellow card against
Yeah.
Paraguay, and like you're setting a precedent which is very hard. Like, because other countries, if anything befalls them, God forbid, they will use this as an example by inciting the very infamous Rule 27, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is the thing, like the debate overnight here has been because, we've had legal experts digging into FIFA statutes, if Rule 27 even applies to this, right? And apparently it doesn't, right? Because like a red card is not like, the disciplinary thing that follows. These things are completely separate. A red card in the moment, you can't go back. That's like going back and saying, I want to change the result of the game. Right, you can't do that. It's that simple. There's no mechanism in football for that to happen, even though it happened in AFCON last or as early as this spring, kind of thing. So it's an interesting one, but I do think that there's an awful lot of questions. If we zoom out, actually, so we're going to have to there's an awful lot of work that football has to do because of the sacrifices it has made to play the game in this part of the world at this current time politically have far-reaching consequences. And again, this is not unprecedented. If you go back to 1978 when it was played in a dictatorship in Argentina, we've been to Qatar, we've been to Russia. This is new ground, but it's the extent to which and how publicly this is happening. Because of course, Donald Trump was there talking about literally saying, "I had no idea what a red card was. I didn't understand what it was I was watching, but then I made calls anyway, and now I've got my own way, and I'm delighted." Like, this is nonsense. I mean, we can't have that in a rules-based sport.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think, now I think we put this aside and we go on to like a very brief 60-second review about Sweden's campaign. I think it went far for the course, but do you feel anything more needs to be said? Like, I think we have covered it with previous episodes, but anything new
Yeah.
to add?
No, I think they turned out to be exactly who we thought they were. You know, they had a very good attack, they had a very soft centered defense and that kind of thing. But I think what was interesting for me was Graham Potter and how he sort of steered the whole thing. He did a great job of managing expectations. Right today, the like last night when or yesterday evening when the Norway beat Brazil, I was looking at the headlines of Norwegian newspapers and they're saying we can win the World Cup. We can win the World Cup. Graham Potter never got carried away with that. He talked about the honour and the privilege of coaching Sweden. We go as far as we can. They get out of the group, they lose to France. There's no shame in that, and I think that that's really the only sign that they have. You know, that this is how they're on the right way because it doesn't matter what players he have. Give this guy time. He's going to work this out. Sweden will get back to where they should be. Will they win the World Cup in 4 years' time or 8 years' time? Probably not. But they will make a quarter final or a semi final again because they have the right guy in place now to steer this ship. But he just needs more time. He only got the job last October in very difficult circumstances. So I think he did very well, but I think there's an awful lot more work to do there.
Yeah, I think he'll be graded on how he does at the Nations League and then the 2028 Euros if they do qualify for it. Hopefully, they do qualify for the tournament. But yeah, like I think he will be graded on that. And then I think his contract was extended till 2030, right? Or was it
Yes,
2028?
yeah, so he has like a contract for another few years. I know he did sign an extension there in the spring, and that is a good sign for him as well because Swedish football now needs consistency, but more so than anything else, it needs somebody who understands the culture. John Dahl
Mm.
Thompson did not do that, but Potter does because you know the time in Östersund, like I think he really learned about Swedish football and
Yeah.
what it values and what it doesn't. I think that, and I also think it's great to have an outsider, to have an Englishman coming in from outside to say, look, these are the things that I've seen in the Premier League. You know, you're talking about an extremely competent coach there, but given
Yeah.
time, I think he'll come good.
Yeah. Okay. Now on to your adopted team or like your favorite outsider team, which you had revealed in the previous episode. And I just want to say, like, they truly were one of the bravest teams I've ever seen. Like, I'm talking about Cabo Verde there and how they literally went punch for punch with Argentina, the defending champions. And man, like that Sydney Lopez Cabral goal, that I've been watching it on loop day by day. Like such a stupendous goal. And what added to it was the celebration also. Like he went to meet his girlfriend, who we later found out was his girlfriend, and it just adds to the whole mythos of the entire game as well as the goal. Like it was like stupendous.
But I think they just provided the balance that we're looking for. Like all this other grubby stuff, like suspended red cards, and you know all the other talk that's going on, and the way Iran were treated, the way the Somali referee was treated, that kind of thing. All of these things have been horrible to watch. But to see Cape Verde come in here and do what they did, like they didn't lose in normal time to Spain, Uruguay, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina. Three of those are top nations in world football. Three of them have won the World Cup. Uruguay won, I think, way back in the 30s or whatever. So you're talking about serious, serious footballing nations, and a nation of 500,000 people, which was basically nowhere to be seen 10 years ago in African football, has come through. And not only, like, a couple of years ago, I remember seeing, Costa Rica did really well in 2014 in Brazil, but they played an ultra defensive style of football, which is, and once they got out of the group, then they really suffered. They got out of a very difficult group. I think it had Italy, England, and Croatia, and they sort of progressed in the same
Uruguay.
way. Oh, it
Uruguay.
was Uruguay was the other team, yeah.
Yes.
And and they got out of that group then, and they but then they suffered, Whereas I thought that Cape Verde, okay, they only played one knockout match here, but they looked like you say they went toe to toe with Argentina. Of course, they were under massive pressure and that kind of thing, but when they got on the ball, they looked to do something positive and something beautiful and something cool with it. And I think that there's a huge lesson to be learned that when the FIFA technical group, usually Arsene Wenger is part of that, and there's a couple of other former coaches, Andy Roxburgh from Scotland, and they will make a report about what they've seen. And I have no doubt that they're going to look at Cape Verde and say, okay, this is a team that has understood the assignment when it comes to international football, right? You need that organisation, you need that commitment, you need that sense of buy-in. But also, when you get the ball over the halfway line, you don't have to get it, just by hooping it from one end of the field to the other. You can play football against these teams. And again, Norway showed it yesterday against Brazil because they dominated possession, which no one would have expected before the game, right? Nobody was expecting this. And yet they needed to do that because they had to control the tempo of the game because otherwise they would have been even more exhausted than they were. And
Exactly.
Pico Lopez and Cape Verde, they really understood that. And I thought they did an absolutely brilliant job of it. Now, the problem for them, obviously, is the next time they get to an AFCON and the next time they get to a World Cup, people are going to be setting up to take these guys down. And maybe they don't have a pool of players. But that said, I'd say there's probably a whole load of people with Cape Verdean citizenship or the right to get it who are decent footballers who'll be looking at that going, okay, maybe they might send me a LinkedIn message like they sent to Pico Lopez and I might get the chance to play for them.
Yeah, I think like like it goes to show, like, the power of football as well, like the power of the World Cup as well, like the scarcity, it coming 4 years, you get to know these stories, these human interest stories. And I think that's what is like beautiful about the football World Cup. Like, because we do have the cricket World Cup, which happens every couple of years in different formats, and it's also within a cabal, like, so to speak, in a cartel of like a few nations as well. And that's, I think, the difference between what football is and how football is a working class sport at its very roots as well. And that shows in all these stories, right? Like how a country of the resources of Cape Verde, which doesn't really have that much, it's not really the most developed nation out there, but it's able to punch above its weight due to other factors, and which are like, maybe, it's all intrinsically linked to the society as well. So there's that as
Mm.
well. So I think that it's such a beautiful story. I hope to see future stories like that. And yeah, like I hope they do well at the next AFCON, like maybe reach a semi-final or hopefully do better. And I want to see them qualify for the next World Cup. And goes to show that they will. I think they hopefully they improve as well, and develop their style. And to contrast that with the travesty which Paraguay put us through in that France game, what a horrific. Like I have no words for how Paraguay played. I maybe you may differ with me on that, but I just didn't think they were playing to win. They were just playing to stymie France and not allow them to, keep all their players for the next round. That's my
Yeah.
opinion.
I think the last team I saw do something like that was the Dutch side in 2010 in South Africa, which made its way all the way to the final, and with Mark Van Bommel just fucking kicking everybody, pardon my French, kicking everybody who came across him and that kind of thing. And I think I'm kind of delighted that France basically dispatched them and that we will never have to see them again.
Oh my
Because in the
God, yeah.
group stage, you'd be kind of rooting for Paraguay, but the cynicism of that, and that cynicism does exist in football. It existed for a long time in Italian football, and that if you can get away with it, or that there was also an incident yesterday when Norway had pretty much beaten Brazil at this stage, and Neymar kicked out at Martin Odegaard. And that made me very angry, actually, because I was thinking, like, Neymar, you're going home. In fact, you're probably going to retire because you're way past your best. And
Yeah,
this guy
yeah,
is moving on to a World Cup quarter final. Why would you endanger him? Put him in danger of being injured. That to me
yeah,
was a deeply unsporting thing to do. But
yeah.
Paraguay were by far the worst. And like people say, oh, why are you criticizing sort of smaller nations like this? They're doing what they have to do. No, you don't have to do that, right? There are ways of defending that are fair and that are hard, that don't go over the line into risking injuring other players, and that don't go over into this cynicism and trying to get under people's skin and that kind of thing. Holland is an expert at getting under people's skin in a nice way, right? You might want to punch the head off him, but he'll just grin at you, and then all of a sudden you go,
Yeah.
okay. And there's a physical battle there, but he is usually like he's an extremely strong, an extremely physical player, but he's not dirty. And he wouldn't kick out at you just for the sake of it kind of thing. No, he'll push and he'll pull and he'll drag. But everybody does that. So I think Paraguay, no, I don't think too many people will be sorry to see the back of them after that.
Yeah, like I think even Mbappe, after a bit, he was just smiling, he was laughing, and I think that's the way you deal with
Yeah.
bullies. After a point, that I think they were bullies. That's what I would say. So yeah, now we go on to the travails of Canada and how they unfortunately lost to Morocco. I think that the first half against Morocco was the best I saw them play football this entire tournament, and like they didn't take the chances, which is a very usual thing with Canada this tournament, and they have missed. The services of Alfonso Davies. But what is your review on it, and what has been the mood inside the country now that you've seen it? And like, I think the two knockout games were outside Canada as well. How were there any watch parties? What has been the overall thing like?
Oh yeah, the watch parties were amazing here because, like, in public places, public squares here, there's a park not too far from where I'm sitting, and they had watch parties there, and it was a huge thing. Like, the country really was captivated by it. It would have been so much better if they'd managed to play the games in Vancouver. And I think that game against Morocco, we saw who Canada are and where their football, where they are in the sort of the footballing food chain kind of thing. They don't have that sort of goal against strike. I know you have very good players like Jonathan David, and you have Kyle Larn up there. You have guys who can score goals. The lack of Alfonso Davis was a disaster for them because he's one of those players who can just dominate from that wing. And it doesn't matter left back, left wing, left forward, whatever you want to call it. He's just a dominant presence there, and to not have that for Canada was absolutely disastrous. But what the question I have really, Ashish, is over Jesse Marsh, right? Because the whole camp struck me as being a little bit sort of paranoid about everything. The way they treated
Hmm.
Marsh's injury, and they told us he was in a return to play protocol, and then they told us, oh yeah, no, he's available. And then he came out, and a friend of mine, Joe Callahan, asked a question after one of the games, and he said, no, he wasn't available at all.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, Jesse Marsh, you just lied to us all. So why should
Mhm.
we believe anything you say about the fitness of your players in the future? And that to me is a cut-off point because this is not a club side. You could talk about, oh, but marginal gains and by all means necessary and, all is fair and love and war and that kind of thing. No, this is a national team. You're representing the country of Canada. Please don't lie on their behalf, right? Don't go out
Mm.
there and do things like that. Don't go out there and mislead the press. And in a World Cup that has been so surrounded, I don't know how it is in India now, but everywhere you watch on TV here, there are gambling ads. Everywhere you go online, every bit of sports coverage you look at, you'll see a bookmaker there, somebody advertising, the best odds for the World Cup and that kind of thing. People who are gambling, I'm not a gambler, I'm not a drinker, I have no vices whatsoever apart from the game of football, right? But people who are gambling do so based on information. So Jesse Marsh is coming out and telling people that against Switzerland, Alfonso Davis is fit to play. And then, they're a goal down or 2 goals down. Alfonso Davis coming, they've made their bets based on that information put out there by Jesse Marsh. And then all of a sudden he comes out after the game and he says, oh no, he wasn't fit to play. Like that's morally indefensible. You
Mm.
simply can't do that to people, and that's why we have a press core. Where we have a media core with people like me following these people around the place. So I think Jesse Marsh really needs to be pulled in by the ear to the offices of the Canadian Football Federation and told, look, at certain things are okay. That was not one of them. And it's one of these things we'll have to return to because if you're going to have so much gambling in the sport, then the least the sport can do is attempt to be honest with those who are watching it. I do think, however, though, the legacy is going to be a little bit stronger than maybe what we otherwise might have thought, right? It's taken, USA 94 was what, I don't know how many years ago that was. Like, it was a long
30
time
years
ago now.
back. 30
30
years back,
years
yeah.
ago, right? So, 30, 32 years ago. And it took so long for Major League Soccer to get to the stage where it is today, where it's still not, most championship teams in England will probably beat MLS teams, right? And it's taken a while to get there. So the immediate legacy for Canada is not going to be, Canadian players playing in the Champions League week in and week out kind of thing. But I do think that the attitude towards soccer in this country has changed. It's much more present on the streets now when you talk to people and that. And even the people who are disinterested, even the people who are hockey fans have taken an interest in this Canadian team.
Yeah, so yeah, I hope Canada is able to build on this and hopefully they're able to, do better in the 2030 edition of the World Cup. And also, I think I want them to do better in the continental competitions as well, like, reach more finals of the Gold Cups. And I don't know whether they play in the Copa Americas, but if they do play there as well to, give a
Yep.
good account of themselves as well. So, yeah, I just wanted to end with two human interest stories, which you did, I mean, for writers. One was about the Squamish people, how they were watching the game against South Africa. They are like First Nation people. You can give me more details. I don't know the specifics, but I think there's that. And another is about the policing in general in Vancouver. With I presume it's with regard to the World Cup, right?
It is indeed, yeah. So the first question that you had there is that we were very much aware of the fact that this is basically Canada is basically what they call unceded land. Okay, so the people, the First Nations peoples who are here, this is still their land, and it's something that is a topic of conversation here in Canada, showing this respect towards the First Nations peoples. So we wanted to talk to some of the Squamish people, who are one of the three major First Nations tribes, if you like, in the Greater Vancouver area. And I just happened across them at one of the watch parties, which was downtown at the FIFA Fan Festival. And you have all these big brands that are paid millions of dollars to be there to provide snacks and to provide entertainment. And there's car makers and there's all sorts of people, beer brewers, everybody's there. And then I came across this stand, and it was a Squamish family who they make their own jewelry. So they make their own jewelry from beads and from weaving and all sorts of stuff like this. And there they were in the middle of all these global brands. There's this Squamish family sitting selling their stuff. And they were telling me, how great it was for them for the World Cup to be there, and for them to be able to sell their handcrafts and their jewelry there was a tremendous thing. I'd love to have dipped into it more because I think one of the things about having the World Cup, particularly in Canada, was the fact that they had to be convinced, the First Nations peoples had to be convinced that this was worth the investment, it was worth the time, it was worth the changes that were going to happen in society. But it would appear that they're quite happy with it. But the last story that you mentioned there, and that's actually due to come out now in the next couple of hours after we're finished speaking, it's currently going through the editing process. So in Vancouver, where the BC Place Stadium is in downtown Vancouver, it's a beautiful place. There's like water right beside it. You'll see the Science Museum. That's the one that's done up to look like the big football. You'll see that on your TV and that. But a couple of blocks from the stadium, Ashish, is what they call the downtown east side. And if you go down to the junction of Hastings and Main Streets here, it's one of the, not strangest, but it's one of the most upsetting things I've ever seen. Now, I come from a city in Dublin, the capital of Ireland. In the 1980s, we had a heroin epidemic there that was, one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. To see people on the street who are suffering from this particular addiction, the crime that they have to go through to get the money that they need for drugs and that kind of thing. And I would have been very aware of that growing up in Ireland. I would have been a teenager at the time. And I arrived here, and it was almost by accident that we ended up driving down Hastings Street one day. And it's just, people with their belongings, with tarpaulins, with shopping trolleys and carts, and just in various states of, some of them are high at the time, some of them are looking to get money to get high, some of them had the money to get high, are looking to do drug deals. But there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people along Hastings Street, and then in the alleys off to the side, and on Main Street and Pender Street and that kind of thing, Oppenheimer Park, which is nearby as well. So I spoke to those people down there. Now, it's not an easy place to go to because you have people who are suffering from all sorts of things, right? They're suffering from withdrawal symptoms, things. And I went down and I started talking to them, and the stories they told me were kind of amazing, right? So they told us that they're used to having, the police on their back and park rangers being on their backs, that kind of thing. But since the World Cup, or before the World Cup, they felt that, okay, they really feel unwanted in the city here. So the city comes along with the park rangers. People are allowed to sleep in parks, pitch tents and sleep in parks overnight. But then the park rangers come along in the morning and wake them up. And then if they don't move, the cops would have previously come and sort of moved them along. But this time, the park rangers were arriving. 10 minutes later, the police were coming. And then all their belongings were being confiscated. Now, they can, in inverted commas, get their stuff back. But it's a very complicated process. And you're not dealing with people who are, in a situation where they can follow a whole process with the police, open a ticket, go to the city, get the things.
Yeah.
That's just not what these people do. They have other concerns, and most of those concerns have to do with drugs. So it has been very much an eye opener, and a lot of, indeed, I'm not going to name him, but I was talking to one former Premier League footballer here at the hotel the other day, and he was shocked. And he comes from a very tough working class part of England. And if this guy is shocked, I know where he's from. And if this guy is shocked at what he's seeing, then this is something shocking. Now, it also has to be said that we drop in here and we're very sort of cognizant of the fact that we are correspondents. We come in, we see something, we see it on that surface level. We don't have the same deep understanding that local people involved in local politics and activism have. So we went and spoke to those people rather than me saying, this is what I see, this is terrible. There's no point in me doing that, right? But I spoke to the people who are experiencing homelessness and addiction. I spoke to the police, I spoke to the city, and I spoke to the FIFA organizing committee. And as I say, the story's currently going through the editing process. I hope it goes out as I wrote it, because I think I took a fairly balanced approach to it. And it's not the case that, the FIFA World Cup is the cause of any of this, but it certainly has made life more difficult for some very marginalised and very underserved communities. And there's lots of things there, and there's lots of different solutions. It's very complex and that kind of thing. But what is undeniable is that there has been a change in the way that these people have been policed. And again, if we're going to look at football as the global game that brings us all together, then that has to apply for everybody. And it has to apply for communities like the one in the downtown east side here, who are so visible to football fans. There isn't a football fan who has been here, because the best restaurants in Chinatown are a stone's throw from this place. And I do think that if there's one thing we can achieve from being here back home and covering the World Cup, there's two things I'd like to achieve. One is to raise the game, get people to have an understanding for the Canadian attitude towards the game. And also the fact that the World Cup is a force for good. The football can be a force for good and brings people together. In that case, like I just said, that it has to be everybody. We have to include everybody in that. It doesn't matter where you're from politically, your gender, your religion, any of those kinds of things. We have to use it as this unifying force, because that's the point of the World Cup to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a very difficult discussion, right? Like, to hear about all these it's these people have turned to substance abuse because of certain circumstances in life. Right? I'm not saying they wantedly have turned to, like, I mean, there are certain circumstances which have made them, turn to other, drugs to, for them to, forget about whatever it is. And I feel like, see, I mean, the policing, maybe they are doing it to, make it more safer for, so to speak, for, the general public. But there is a way of doing it by ensuring that these people find the help they need also, right? Probably like putting them across to the right people, like, the addiction centers, or, you know, Narcotics Anonymous, or whatever. I don't know what the procedure is like there with people who deal with addiction, but yeah, there is. I feel there could be a better way of, ensuring these people get the help they need, and also looking after them from a more holistic standpoint. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And part of this has to do with the fact that when you make a host city agreement with FIFA, you say that you're going to offer a safe and a clean and a secure environment, right?
Yeah.
Vancouver passed a bylaw earlier on this year, and it covered everything from the definition of what daytime is, which I think now is 7 o'clock in the morning until like midnight or something, to graffiti, to signage, to buildings and derelict sites and all that kind of thing. All those things are covered up with beautiful FIFA hoardings and this kind of thing. Sure, it's done at the expense of the city, right? But part of that then comes down to policing as well and making people. Now, I don't feel unsafe. When I'm in a place like Hastings, I don't feel unsafe because a person who has drugs or a person who's high is of no danger to me whatsoever. The problem comes when they don't have drugs and they need money to get them. That's when you have to be careful of people. But we also have to be cognizant of their situation because these things are not simple binaries. People don't choose to just go on drugs and that kind of thing. They're always extremely complex. There's always codependencies. I spoke to one activist down there, an academic she has half a dozen jobs, but she's also a drug user herself. And she said everybody winds up down here. Right? There isn't a social class that isn't
Mhm.
represented on Hastings Street. Right? So and she's talking about the people who hang out there all day, the people who are standing there bent double because fentanyl and sedatives relax their muscles so much that they can only, the soles of their feet are sort of there and their heads, their foreheads are almost touching them kind of thing. And she was saying that, she sees everybody down there. So both the people who hang out there kind of full time and who carry their belongings around in a trolley, but also people who work in banks and insurance companies and construction sites and who drive taxis and who work in hotels because they come down there because they know where to get the dope. These are
Yeah.
enormous societal problems. And in a way, as journalists, as chiefs, we have to look at these things and say, okay, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of the reporting I'm doing here? And in this case, it's simply to make people aware of the fact that these societal problems exist. And this then plays into a bigger narrative of how do we treat people like this in our society? Because again, they really only want to be seen like people. They really only want, many of them have no intention of quitting drugs. I can tell you that here now because I spent a week speaking to them, right? They like taking drugs. They love their community of other drugs. Does crime happen? Absolutely. Do they get robbed of their possessions and badly treated police? Absolutely. But this life for them is so much better than whatever it is they're trying to escape. And instead of looking at it from the point of view of law and order or from the point of view of, what's the morally right thing to do, we have to look at the reality of the situation. And the
Mhm.
reality of the situation for them is actually ensuring a drug supply that's not toxic and a policing system that treats them with dignity.
Yeah.
Those two things, not just in Canada, not just on Hastings and Maine, but anywhere else in the world, I think we'll go a long way towards solving the issues of drugs and homelessness cause for us in society.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I don't want to take up more of your time as well. I think this is a good note to like end on. And yeah, like I think we'll probably have one more recording after this. Probably
Yep.
I think post the Switzerland game. It could be like hopefully it'll be after Norway beats England, and I'll be doing the introduction with you in the first minute will be in Norwegian. So like we'll have to if that's the
Let's aim for
case,
that.
let's hope for that. And yeah, like I just want to let everyone to know, I will definitely attach the links to both these stories once they come out in the description of the video. And please like and subscribe. Like it is a big deal, that Philip is taking the time to come with us and give us this different perspective about different hot button topics within the larger ecosystem of the World Cup. So yeah, like it does make a difference, and he's been very kind to facilitate that, even though he has a ton of like work with which he can be doing it, and like he is just helping out a couple of kids in India who have like a crazy thing, and he just helped us. He's been very kind enough to help us out. So yeah, thank you so much, Philip, for your for your time. That's all I
My
would like to say.
my pleasure as always, Ashish.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, bye, guys, and ciao.